welcome. Today I'm sort of re-recording a previous video, which annoyingly it came out quite well in terms of I said what I sort of wanted to say, but the problem was, the camera was just unbearably shaky. So I just thought, that would just be a fucking terrible viewing experience. So I wanted to sort of re-record a little bit, rehashing some of the general ideas of what I was talking about, particularly with regards to the inevitability of Bitcoin, which may come to some ears as a quite provocative statement, and I suppose I intend it to be a provocative statement. To some others, it will come across as a pretty mundane or just obvious thing, which is but I guess sort of your perception of that will be a function of how immersed or how immersed you are in this sort of the Bitcoin space in terms of understanding, reflecting on its implications for our economies, for the for the future of money and whatnot, so I guess sort of I'm making this video as a way to sort of represent different perceptions of Bitcoin, because I feel that in most most legacy financial circles, in orthodox economics, for example, Bitcoin is still perceived as a more along the lines of a speculative asset, something that weird young people seem to like to gamble on because it's highly volatile, and less often do you see the sort of the different perception, which is of Bitcoin as a interesting innovation, an interesting technology in the way that human beings use money. And I think the perception of it as a speculative asset as well as a monetary technology, they're not mutually exclusive ideas. I don't think they don't necessarily contradict one another. I think all investment involves some degree of speculation, but of course, when people are speculating on stuff, there are reasons, there are ways of informing their speculation, such that it's not totally ungrounded. So I guess this would raise the question of what sort of reasons are leading people to want to speculate on this weird thing called Bitcoin. And that would take me into the sort of the next discussion into what are the interesting properties of Bitcoin, what are the arguments that would seem to suggest that it is a monetary technology as opposed to this weird kind of internet money. What problems does it seek to solve in relation to our current forms of money, the likes of dollars, pounds, yens, fiat currencies, as they are sort of called. And so I guess this is a discussion that it will stretch out into many different disciplines. Bitcoin is one of the things which is I think one of the reasons why economics at the moment is generally being sort of poorly received is because of over specialization. Bitcoin is something that first people to really understand it tend to be computer programmers who could understand the nuances of the code, of how programmatic money, how the cryptographic elements of proof of work, for example, of hashing, public-private key cryptography. It might sound like I'm throwing out a bunch of jargon, but that's the point, because these sort of things would be the bread and butter of people in the the cypherpunk space of people into computer programming who probably have certain leanings toward thinking about money, thinking about economics and stuff like that. Those people are going to be the first people to be interested, for it to come on their radar, and then they would exert the effort in trying to understand what it is and think about it on a deep sort of level. And it's important to think that Bitcoin didn't just emerge out the blue. There were other attempts at creating an electronic cash, some which were, stocked by the US government, for example. Um, some which were, centralized that weren't truly decentralized in the way that Bitcoin was. Um, you know, yeah, there are other historical attempts at creating a Bitcoin or proto Bitcoin like things online. But then it was obviously Bitcoin that was the first one to really blow up in a very profound and powerful kind of way. So I guess when you think about that, you think about, well, actually, a, a cryptographically based currency, um, there's a kind of, well, yeah, it makes sense why something like that could be created. If there is the opportunities, the advancements in, you know, in cryptography and, the different blockchain technologies that can be merged together to create a sort of an artifact, a commodity, a digital commodity like Bitcoin. If the seeds are there, then it's only a matter of time until someone, um, namely Satoshi Nakamoto, who has the sort of prerequisite knowledge and competence to be able to do such a thing. It's only a matter of time before a certain innovator like that would do something like Bitcoin, for example. Scientific innovation is it happens. It's an ordinary thing, and so I guess sort of this is sort of part of priming in terms of looking at how money is fundamentally a technology that humans use to coordinate economic activity, to exchange value, and have some kind of medium of exchange for earning their rewards for working, for buying products and services with humans. There's a rich history of economic and monetary organization, stretching back to antiquity. And an important thing to point out about the sort of different monetary organizations that humans use is that they are not perfectly stable. They are subject to entropy, they are subject to change, and they are subject to innovation. We don't. There are lots of currencies. Most currencies we don't use today. They died out in the past, and there are reasons why they die out. And when you seriously think about that, well, you look at the current currencies that we generally use. I think it is highly unlikely to think that they will persist indefinitely, particularly into the fastly encroaching digital age that we're all walking blindly into. The US dollar is currently a global reserve asset for exchange, but it is also a dollar that a currency which is, at a non-trivial rate is being inflated year on year, and you can call it inflation. You can also call it debasement, and that sounds provocative, but it is what it is. Monetary debasement by some kind of centralized entity who has the power and the authority to do it is a very common thing throughout history. The Romans did it. Happened all the way through medieval Europe, in terms of coin clippings and whatnot, where coins would be issued, but the percentage of gold and silver would be clipped off of it, removed off of it, but it will still be sold at the prior value, which is a form of debasement, which governments would often do to also fund a war or something like that. The reason why Nixon initially suspended the gold standard in the what's known as the Nixon shock in 1971 was partially due to the financial pressures of funding the Vietnam War. And ever since 1971, we have had a monetary network of floating fiat currencies. And like I've said in the past, fiat, it's a Latin term for let it be done, which is where the value of the currency is asserted by decree. It's asserted by confidence in the integrity of the issuing authority. It in essence, it relies on trust in them not to debase it that much. But they will typically aim for a sort of debasement or an inflation level of roughly 2% each year, so which translates to we are going to dilute your savings by 2% each year, because this is quote unquote good. I mean, it's good from within a monetary system that is based on credit, based on the creation of debt and the creation of ever compounded debt. And like that, and so that would tie into like the whole different theories of money, where we have commodity theories of money as it relates to gold, silver, precious metals, and whatnot, and then we have credit theory of money, which is where money is a liability to a central bank, pretty much, and that's what fiat currency is. It's a liability to the respective issuing bank, whether it's the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve banks, or the banks of Japan and stuff like that. And a basic and fundamental problem with fiat currencies, with these forms of money, where they can be created at will out of nothing by a certain centralized entity, is that we are essentially trusting that entity. And the problem with trust is extremely significant. It is perhaps one of the most central motivations behind the creation of Bitcoin, and this is made quite explicit in the white paper, particularly in the abstracts, which is where I think there is a quote from Satoshi where he talks about one of the basic problems of money is all the trust that is required to maintain the integrity of that money. And the history of money, the history of fiat currencies, is one of consistent breaches of that trust. I would inspire people to look into the Bank of England war bonds problem. That's one example. I don't want to go into it here now, but that's a very interesting one. It was kept secret by the Bank of England for a very long time. But I'll let you sort of do your own research and look into that yourself. But currency debasement is it's happening now. It's why we have inflation. Often, there are different ways in which inflation can occur. They can occur from, markets being thrown into disarray by some kind of supply shock, which means that demand is now outstripping supply significantly, which say poor harvest, for example, that would drive up prices. But that's inflation that's inflation that is for non-monetary reasons. That is, it's inflation that's not caused by massive increases in the money supply. And often these sort of types of inflation will be specific to the different sectors and industries that are affected by whatever supply shock happens. Monetary inflation is the one that is, it's not discussed enough, but it's one of the central drivers. And quite simply, monetary inflation is inflation that's formed by the increases in monetary supply by the issuing authority. And you think about it conceptually, when you create money out of nothing, and often it's when money is created, there's a certain movement from how it moves from the person who creates it to the rest of the economy. And naturally, people closest to the money printer, closest to the issuing authority, they'll be the ones who benefit most from the newly created money. This is something that's called the Cantillon effect, I think. Cantillon effect, something like that, which is based on an idea by a 17th century economist, or 18th century economist. But it's basically a look at how, when inflation is created, what sort of subsections of the population benefit disproportionately. And obviously, in our current monetary order, monetary system, money is created often by central banks, often created by commercial banks when they issue debt. For example, it's called fractional reserve lending, which is where banks are given the capacity to lend beyond the amount of money they have in their reserves, and it creates a very interesting and often highly fragile structure, especially when banks engage in increasingly risky and speculative behaviour with lending, with the buying and investing in stupid things. That it creates a significant risk of bank runs and bank insolvency. But a problem with our sort of current system is that there's what's known as a moral hazard, which is where basically banks know that they'll be bailed out because they're systemically important. We can't let them fail because it would cripple the entire financial network. So there is a sort of the ideological justification for governments to bail out these systemically important entities to keep them afloat, even though they really should fail, like other businesses. This is the nature of creative destruction. But taken serious, and this is a response to the 2008 crisis. From the COVID crisis, you even had bank bailouts and also corporate bailouts as well, which is just an exaggeration of that kind of central planning by the monetary authorities. And it creates a system where banks are a protected class in society. And when they know that they're a protected class, and when they have that safety net from the government bailing them out, often with printed money, it just gives them free license to continue their stupid behaviour because they know there's going to be no consequences to it. And so this is basically a roundabout way of talking about the problem of trust with regards to our money. Banks are the custodians of our money, but with their behaviour, they frequently display incompetence in that regard. And this incompetence is financially rewarded because of certain ideological commitments to keeping solvency in the banking sector. But I feel like the problem of bailouts with easily created money, it doesn't address the root problem with money, which is the problem of trust. It doesn't address that. It kind of just plasters over and kicks the can down the road to essentially create a even bigger problem down the road. And so, I'm going to stop recording now, but in my next sort of video, I'll sort of go a bit deeper into the problem of trust with regards to money and how that necessarily leads into a monetary technology such as Bitcoin, which, due to its own mathematical design, the network does not have to rely on trusting a centralized node to maintain the ledger, to maintain the legitimacy and validity of all the transactions, of all the coins that are being transacted. And that's why it's called decentralized. That's why it's called peer-to-peer. They're not just buzzwords. They are just literal descriptions of the way the network works. And in this sort of conversation about trust and money, I'll hope to sort of elaborate more on the central value proposition of Bitcoin and why it's so profound as a monetary technology, and why I personally see it as, in the long term, whether it's 10, 15, 30, 40, 50 years, it will come as a more and more dominant form of transacting value across the internet, but, in order to bring everyone else up to sort of my sort of common understanding, and also to cement my own understanding, my own way of articulating and explaining it and educating, I want to try and work on these videos, and and I wouldn't call myself an expert on Bitcoin at all. It's something that I'm still learning about and still trying to cement my understanding. Like with everything, it's always learning. It's not something that you finish doing. It's something. It's a continual process. But yeah, I'll leave it at that, and I'll see you guys in the next video.